Hi, I'm Ingo from Roasterables, and in this video I will give you 5 tips what you can look at when you want to buy a home coffee roaster. Finding the right roaster for your home isn't that easy. There are different models on the market and it's sometimes a bit difficult to compare them. There are some tests on the internet, but you have to be very careful. Most of them are more promotional texts with the so-called affiliate links. So the ranking is according to the affiliate promotion that the author of the text is getting. So have a look at this when you're searching for information on the internet. Also, this video is not a market comparison of the different models or roasters available. I will mention some of the roasters that are available in this video. At the end of the video, you will also learn why, in addition to the roasters we are selling in the shop, there are a lot of roasters that unfortunately I cannot really recommend, and you will learn more about that later in the video. But what I will give you are 5 tips, 5 things you have to look at when you're looking for a roaster that will help you to find the right model for you. The first thing and the most important thing, which will also guide you through the whole video, is the questions on who you are and what you need this roaster for. I usually see there are 3 different kind of uses of these small roasting machines. One is really like home roasters, people that like to roast coffee fresh for themselves. The other group are people that want to learn the craft of roasting, that want to later maybe become a professional roaster, that really want to understand how roasting is working, how a drum roaster is working, how a roast profile is working. And sometimes these first 2 groups are a bit like mixed together. There are a lot of commercial professional roasters that started as home roasters. Even some of the very known roasters started as home roasters. So when you want to become a home roaster and you have the idea in your head that later you might turn into a professional commercial roasters, then there are just some additional questions that you have to ask yourself, and I will come back on this aspect in a couple of minutes. And the third category of people are then professional roasters, commercial roasters who are looking for a small machine, and usually they need it as a sample roaster, and they have their specific questions that they have to ask, or the specific needs for such a machine. So when you go to the first group of the home coffee roasters, there I see typically some different clusters of people. So on one hand, there are these people who say, I don't know anything about roasting, I just want to try it out, I don't want to spend too much money, I cannot spend too much money, I just want to try it out, how it's working. I heard there is the opportunity to roast coffee at home. And these people usually start with very cheap machines or with roasting devices that they can just find on their home. So some people are trying to do it with their iron, with their cast or in the oven. But I can recommend you, if you're one of this kind of roasters, is to use a popcorn machine, like these hot air popcorn machines. They're usually quite cheap. You can find them used, or even if you buy a new one, it's usually quite cheap. Because I also have made a video, you can find it here, on the heat transfer, convection, conduction, and there I explain it a bit in detail why it is better to have a roasting device that transmits heat mostly with the hot air. And if you're roasting in a pan, you have the risk to burn the beans, you have the risk of have very uneven roasts. And for example, a popcorn machine, or there are also hot air fryers that some people are using. These are devices where the heat is transmitted usually by the air, and these are devices that work quite well to try out roasting at home. Some people even then start to upgrade these machines. You can find a lot of information on the different boards in the internet on how to install a thermocouple and whatever. But at the beginning, you can just take one of those devices and start. But I just recommend you is to go outside or go in a space where it doesn't disturb that when roasting, because when roasting there are these so-called choughs. These are small skins of the beans. They are being released. In all the roasting machine, you have some mechanism that will hold back or that will collect these choughs. But for example, in a popcorn machine or a hot air fryer, you usually don't have that. So they're blown out to your kitchen if you're roasting inside. That's why I recommend you to go maybe outside in the garden to roast with a popcorn machine. And then there is the group of people that say, no, I seriously want to roast coffee at my home. I'm a home roaster. I want to have fresh coffees. I want to try out different beans, different profiles. But this kind of group are not the kind of people that need to deep dive too specifically. These are, for example, the people that just do a nice espresso out of the machine, that don't really care about the pressure profiles or whatever. They just want to have a good fresh coffee. And for those kind of people, they usually roast, for example, with a gene roaster, or in the US, it's also very popular to roast with a BMO roaster. These are roasting machines that really help you to make really nice roasts. You have the full range of roasts. You have not as much as control or repeatability to the profile, or not as much as possibilities to work on the profile as with, for example, a drum roaster. But still you can do different profiles. You can roast actually the whole range of coffees that you want. And most people that are using these machines are really like using them for decades. I have several customers who have a gene roaster for about 10 years or more. So they're really reliable, they're fun to use, and you have a really high quality coffee at your home. Then the third group of people, I don't know if they like me to call them like this, but they're maybe a bit nerdy. They really like to have information on the roasts. There are people who really like to deep dive into roast profiles. These are also usually the people who are really deep diving into the capabilities of their espresso machines, that really care about the evenness of the grinds, pressure profiles, and all this kind of information. So these are then usually people who really like to work with a roaster that is connected to Artisan or Cropster. Actually, most of the home roasters are connected to Artisan, which is a free software that gives you a lot of information about the different temperatures, thermocouples, but also calculations like the rate of rise, or the roast development time percentage, and much more information. So there you can really deep dive into the roast, work on roast profiles, do roast that you can repeat easily, that you can work on easily. So for this kind of people, it's really then interesting to go, for example, to a hot top roaster or an Ailio bullet roaster. These are these kind of roasters that give you a lot of information and have the possibility to really work on profiles very nicely. And these are also exactly the machines that I would recommend to a person who says, I really want to learn the craft of roasting. I want to understand how a roasting machine is working, how a roast is working. I maybe later want to develop roast profiles on my roasters. So for them, it's really these roasters that you can connect to Artisan, where you have a drum roaster that is comparable to the later production roaster that you will have in the future, that measures bean temperature, which is actually the same measuring point that most of the commercial drum roasters are measuring, that have a different control for the power, for the airflow. So this kind of information that you can really use to develop roast profiles, and you learn about roasting and later use these machines also to develop roast profiles for your production roasters. And then thirdly, There are the professional roasters that are looking for a small roasting machine, and they usually need it as a sample roaster. And I will surely make a video also on sample roasting. When it's finished, you will find it here on this link. For those group of people, there are usually two uses that are a bit different. So one is more the quality, the green coffee aspect. These are maybe traders or buyers from green coffee, or is quality control of the green coffee beans. They have a special need for machines. Or on the other hand, then those roasters who want to develop a roast profile that they can later adapt to their production roaster and get as much information as possible for their production roasters. Number two is the capacity of the roaster. When you're buying a roaster, you don't want it to be too large in capacity. You also don't want it to be too small in capacity. And capacity is actually an information that you can easily find for each roaster. So each roaster that you buy will mention you the capacity that it has. One rule of thumb that I can recommend you when it comes to the capacity is usually the roasting machines work best at about 80% of the mentioned capacity, because there you still have some flexibility to work with the heat transfer, to work with the heat, make them faster, slower. And I also learned in my experience on many roasters is that the minimum capacity is around 1/3 of the mentioned maximum capacity. When you go lower than 30%, you often have the risk of burning the beans, of scorching. So usually, the range between 40 and 80% of the mentioned capacity of the roaster is the capacity that you can work on most. If you go lower, you have the risk of burning the beans. If you go higher, then you have the risk of baking the beans. Questions that you can ask yourself when you want to find out the right capacity of your roaster is, how often am I going to roast? What a lot of people do is they roast, for example, every second weekend some coffees. Then how much coffee do I need per week? Do I need just one bean of coffee, or am I working with different beans? For example, one for a brew, another one for espresso. And also the questions, do I just roast one bean and larger amounts of one bean? Do I usually drink single origin or blends that I put together before the roast? Or am I going to use blends that I'm roasting separately and then mixing together? Because then, of course, I'm mixing smaller amounts of each bean than if I roast a single origin bean that I need for everything. For home roasters, capacities that are really popular are starting from around 200, 250 grams and go up to 500 or even 800 grams of coffee. These are quite popular capacities that work quite well for home roasters that roast the coffee just for themselves. If you want to become later, if you're in the group 2 that want to later become a professional roaster and need the roasting machine later also for professional purposes, there are two ways. Either you say, okay, later I want to use this roasting machine to roast batches that I start with, that I go, for example, to a farmer market, or that I'm going to sell to friends. Then you need a little bit a larger machine. Or you say, no, I'm going to roast on a commercial roaster. I will need this machine for doing samples. Then you will need a bit smaller machines, because samples are better if they're smaller, because for each sample, of course, you're using green coffee beans. So a sample roaster is usually a bit smaller than a roaster that you need to do batches that you're going to sell later on the market. Saying this, we are coming to number 3, and this is the weight of the machines and also some practical aspects of it. If you're choosing a roasting machine that have capacities above 1 kilo, they're usually quite heavy in weight. They're not so mobile, so they're fixed at one space. You cannot really move them. You all quite often then have a fix outlet for the air, for the smoke. So larger roasters than 1 kilo roasters are quite heavy. They need a special space. While on the other hand, the roasters, the home coffee roasters below 1 kilo, so the roasting machines that are around 200, 250 grams especially, they're really light, mobile. You can't compare it to espresso machines. They're really light. You can take them. They're maybe between 5 and 10 kilos in weight. You can put them somewhere to store them and take them out when you roast. And this is, of course, a practical aspect that is quite important for you when you're choosing your roaster. Another thing is how to bring out the smoke or where you're going to roast, because roasting develops smoke. And if you're in a closed apartment, for example, if you're living in a closed apartment, you're roasting there, the apartment will be full of a smoky flavor when you roast. Things that you can do is either, if you have in your kitchen a strong vent, then this really helps you to take out the smoke, and some people are really roasting them in the kitchen using a strong vent to take away the smoke. What you can do in addition is roasting outside. With most home roasting machines, this works quite well. Just be careful that you don't roast in a space where really the sun is directly coming to, or where you have snow. So be a bit secure from the weather. Don't be too exposed to the weather. Go, for example, to a carport, or go to a terrace or balcony where you have some coverage, so you're a bit protected from direct sun or direct weather influences. And if you don't have all of these possibilities, if you want to roast inside, but you have no vent or something to really take away the smoke, then there are some roasters, for example the Gene roaster, which has a just one place where all the hot air and the smoke is coming out, where you can then install a hose that you can lead to your window so that you can take out the smoke and the hot air out of your apartment. So if you're a bit limited to this setup, then have a look at these roasters where you really can canalize and take out the smoke with a hose. These were more practical aspects, and then number 4 is really then an aspect where it comes to roasting, the controlling of the roast. And what here you have to look at is, 1, the ways you can control the roasting machine, and 2, the information that is given to you by the roaster. When controlling the roasting machine, in a best case, you have a separate control for the heat that is going to the roast and for the airflow. So this is actually the best way, because then you can really work on the roast profiles. But with many, especially with cheaper models or simpler models, you're a bit limited to either controlling the heat that is going to the roast or the strength of the airflow. So have a look at this, at the ways that are here to transfer, to control the roaster. And also related to this is what information the roaster can give you. Does it have a thermocouple? So does it have a measure point, or maybe even 2 measure points that are measuring the heat of, for example, the bean temperature, or the exhaust temperature? This is quite important, especially if you say, for example, you later want to develop roast profiles for a professional, for a commercial roaster, then you need at least bean temperature, maybe even exhaust temperature. If you're just roasting for yourself at home, then also or other measuring points are nice. You have to just be aware that you cannot then transfer profiles from one roaster to the other. So to give you an example, the Gene roaster is measuring the temperature of the air that is leaving the roast chambers. Quite some roasters are doing this, or they're measuring the air that is going into the roaster. And these are just factors where you have temperatures mixed, so you have a mixture of bean temperature, of drum temperature, of air temperature, and this just gives you less information than if you would have a precise measuring point on the beans. Just be aware of this. Now with this we're coming to number 5, which is the source of heat and the heat transfer. So in roasting you usually have two different kind of heat sources, which can be either gas or electricity. And if you have a roaster with gas, then of course you need to be comfortable with this. You need a gas source, which can be, for example, a bottle. While when you're working with electricity, you can just usually plug them into the standard home network. So most of or all of the home roasters that I know, they're just working fine with the standard electricity network. So you can choose between one of them. It doesn't really make that much of a difference with these small roasting machines. In large production roasting, it's usually gas that is being used because of effectivity and efficiency of the heat transfer. But for the small machines, it doesn't make a big difference. Gas tends to be a bit quicker in heat changes, but actually for these small machines, it doesn't make that much of a difference because the mass of steel that is within such a roaster is quite small when you compare it, for example, to a larger roasting machine. And then you have to look at how is actually then this heat source heating the beans. So is it directly heating the beans, or is it heating a steel drum where the beans are turning in, or is it heating the airflow, so the temperature of the air that is going through the beans? And actually the question of the airflow is quite an important one, and I made a video specifically on this. You can find it on our channel, where we talk about convection, conduction, radiation, the different kinds of heat sources. And just to make it short here, if you need a choice between one of those, then go for a roaster with as much as convection as possible. So the heat transfer with airflow, because this just helps you to get an even roast, to faster roasting. And usually in standard drum roasters that have a vent, you already have a mixture of about 70% convective heat transfer. And of course, if you have a fluid bed roaster, then it's mostly all of the heat transfer being done by convective heat transfer. And this is something you have to look at. So what I just recommend you is to stay away from roasters that transfer the heat just solely on conductive, like on the direct contact of heat transfer. So that was the same when I was talking about heating beans in the pan. It just doesn't really give you an even roast. It leads to scorching, burned points on the beans. So therefore I recommend you to go for a roaster that absolutely has some kind of vent, that absolutely has heat transfer by an airflow in the roaster. I promised you 5 tips, but I have a 6th one, and this is the topic of safety. So this is quite often being a bit neglected within home roasting, while actually in production roasting with large roaster, it's a big issue, safety of roasting, and home roasters tend to neglect it a bit. But I'm also referring to what I said at the beginning. There are a lot of roasting machines that I can't really recommend strongly because they just don't meet the standards that they would need to be sold in Europe and Switzerland. And a lot of these standards have to do with safety. So I don't want to scare you, but just be aware that you're putting a machine in your kitchen or in your home where you're heating up beans to more than 200 degrees Celsius. And even if the risk is very small, you still have the risk of a fire. And in worst case, if a roasting machine is getting on fire, a kitchen is on fire, maybe in worst case even people are harmed, or the assurance doesn't take any liability because you worked with a roasting machine that is not okay to be working with in your country, then you might have a really serious problem. I don't want to scare you, but just be aware of this when you're looking for roasters that don't meet the standards to work in your country. So to summarize it, we had first it was the question on who you are and especially what you need your roaster for. And then second, we were talking about the capacity. So choose a capacity that is not too low, but also not too high for your roasting. Then we had the more practical aspects of the weight of the roaster, of where you are going to roast with it, like the smoke, how you to bring out the smoke out of your apartment or your house. Then we had number 4, the question of control and information that the roaster is giving to you. Number 5 was the source of heat and also the heat transfer in roasting. And number 6 was the safety of the roaster when you're roasting at home with this machine. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If you want to know more about roasting or the different roasting machines, have a look at the other videos in our channel as well. Follow our channel because we are going to release some more videos in the future about roasting machines. And if you have a direct question to me, I look forward to hearing from you, and you find my contact on roastrebels.com.